Good morning, everyone. This is Robert standing in for Mike today with your Friday morning report for the 12th of December, 2025. Let's get started with Inside the Beltway. So, yesterday, the House passed what's called the Permit Act in a 221 to 205 vote. And this is going to limit states' authority to block energy projects under the Clean Water Act. The House is also expected to vote on another bill next week called the Speed Act. And the idea behind this is to expedite the federal environmental impact review process to speed up some of this energy permitting. Uh, as we've covered before, the real hurdle for the Trump administration solving this energy crisis or this impending energy crisis that we're facing is the state level permitting. And at least the bill that has passed so far is trying to address that. So I'm keeping an eye on where this bill moves in the Senate and how this is actually going to impact energy projects going forward. Moving over to the domestic side, the Indiana State Senate rejected a new mid-decade congressional map yesterday in a 1931 vote. So 21 Indiana state Republicans voted against this bill in the Senate. President Trump and Indiana Governor Mike Braun said that they are going to support primary election challengers against those 21 Republicans. A Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals panel of judges struck down a lawsuit yesterday in Texas that was challenging a Texas ban on foreign nationals from China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea from purchasing land in the state. The judges ruled that the Chinese national who sued actually lacked standing because they are not domiciled in China, which this seems like a bizarre case at first glance because the Chinese national suing would not have been affected by the ban because the ban only covers people who are foreign nationals who are domiciled in those countries, and that's why this lawsuit was dismissed. I think it's possible this individual who's here on a student visa was being used as an intermediary to challenge the ban potentially on behalf of the Chinese government. And then an indictment that was unsealed yesterday revealed some of the targets of those Russian hacktivists that CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, warned about targeting U.S. critical infrastructure. According to this indictment, some of the targets that they did attack with cyber attacks included some state and federal government websites, state water utilities and water wastewater processing facilities, state energy utilities in Pennsylvania and some other states, and oil and gas facilities in Texas. They also targeted a meatpacking plant in in California, in Vernon, California. Moving over to the Homeland Operations side, some activists in New Orleans have formed what they're calling the Free the Swamp Coalition. And these are two of the groups that are named specifically so far are Union Migrante, that immigration activist group that has been doing a lot of the know your rights and accompaniment training and direct action demonstration training for activists in New Orleans, and also the New Orleans Workers Center for Racial Justice. And according to these groups, the purpose behind this coalition is to support illegal aliens impacted by Operation Catahoula Crunch, and they're conducting know your rights training, support and mutual aid, providing donations to illegal aliens who are impacted by the federal surge, and rapid response group training. And this is another one of these organization and coalition building tactics that these progressive democratic socialists and far left and anti or pro immigration groups engage in. And the idea here is that they're building bridges between groups so that when one group wants to conduct some type of action or direct action demonstration or protest, they can call on these other groups to also participate and bolster their numbers. Over in Oregon, a federal district judge imposed a temporary block on what's called unusual noise arrests outside of the Portland ICE detention facility. This was after a lawsuit was filed by Portland, Oregon activists that claim this violated the First Amendment. This unusual noise arrest is part of these new federal regulations for activity on federal facilities we covered a few weeks ago. In this case, this made, quote, unusual noises on the sidewalks in front of the city-owned sidewalks in front of the Portland ICE facility an arrestable offense. And then finally, Mississippi Department of Public Safety said that the Mississippi Highway Patrol, the Bureau of Narcotics, and their Commercial Transportation Enforcement Division are actively assisting federal agencies with immigration enforcement operations as part of Operation Catahoula Crunch. And the Mississippi DPS said that state and local law enforcement are also participating in ICE-led task forces. So this is part of this expansion of Catalina Crunch, or formerly Operation Swamp Sweep, that is focused on New Orleans and some of the suburbs around it, like Kenner, Louisiana, but it has been expected to expand into parts of Mississippi. All right, Jared, if you could come on and take us through the global sit rep, please.
Yep, we're going to start off in Southcom as we do. The U.S., according to sources speaking to Reuters, the U.S. is preparing for seizing more tankers that are hauling sanctioned Venezuelan oil in the coming weeks. The sources claim that a list of targets is already prepared, and unlike normal, being anonymous sources, speaking to legacy media, I am putting a lot of stock in this because this target list would be trivially easy to compile, track, and then actually seize. So I do think this is exactly what's going to happen here in the next coming weeks. And this is functionally a quarantine of Venezuela by seizing targeted goods like this.
Has the Trump administration said what they're going to do with these seized tankers?
Well, historically, it's just been that they now are property of the United States. What they intend to do from there, I'm not sure. There has been a lot of speculation online in online Navy, basically, that, hey, we're already down 100 ships. We need tankers anyway. Maybe we repurpose them. I don't know if that's going to happen. I think that it would be, at the risk of editorializing, I do think that would be a smart move. But
that was the reason why I asked that question, because not to get too into the weeds, but a naval power would need a large commercial fleet. That's a problem the United States has faced. We don't have a huge number of U.S. flagged commercial ships in our fleet. What they're called Jones Act ships. And to me, that would seem like one of the moves the Trump administration would make. I think it's possible that they're thinking that of repurposing these seized tankers for U.S. fleets.
Yeah, considering the short timeline that we would potentially need them on and the depth of the potential target list here, I would think that that's top of mind for many of them, particularly for Secretary Phelan, the Secretary of the Navy.
All right, thank you for Jared. We can move on. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, staying in regards to Venezuela and shipping, the U.S. sanctioned members of Venezuelan President Maduro's extended family for trafficking drugs, and a Maduro-affiliated businessman and 6 companies for trafficking Venezuelan oil. The U.S. also identified 6 more ships operated by those companies as blocked property, functionally sanctioning the property themselves. I think that's adding to the list of tankers to be seized. There was one very interesting thing where they said that they know that one of those tankers is already en route to Asia, and they had tracked the other ones dropping off cargo in Asia. So I think they know where that ship is, and I don't think it's likely, but I don't think it's impossible that we see a high seas capture of this ship outside of the Caribbean. And just a quick note, Southcom is officially changing command. We got Admiral Halsey's resignation a couple months ago. Lieutenant General Pettis will step up and take command. He has been serving in this role, in the second in command role there, for about a year as well. So China's ambassador to the UN released a joint statement from 43 countries that established the Group of Friends of Global Governance, which aims to reform the United Nations for China and the Global South. Now, there were some notable absences. Brazil, Russia, India, and South Africa did not sign on to this joint statement. They refrained from becoming friends of global governance. And also yesterday, the U.S. Embassy in India announced that they would be denying tourist visas to the United States if they believe that the primary purpose is to take advantage of the U.S.'s birthright citizenship law. And lastly, Brazil and the China Electronics Technology Group Corporation, or CETC, began construction on a space telescope project in Brazil this week, and it's ostensibly for astronomical research. But China, as with all things China, they're all dual use. This can be easily repurposed for satellite observation. And this runs counter to the national security strategy's call to, quoting, deny non-hemispheric competitors to own or control strategically vital assets in our hemisphere. That's explicitly what China would be doing here as a state-owned company. I expect the U.S. to get in to attempt to stop this project. We saw similar worries from the United States in Chile and Argentina, where they constantly bring up the spaceports and additional space project partially owned by China down there.
All right, thank you for that, Jared. Let's move on. We're tracking 313 protests for this weekend. If you see that one of these protests is near you, it's a good idea to go out and for your own area study and for our situational awareness on the Forward Observer app to find out what local groups and political parties are participating in these protests and how many people actually show up. Now we're going to move on to our full items for the day. And first, we're going to talk about this amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act of 2026. So the House included an amendment in the NDAA for this next fiscal year that is going to require the Office of the Director of National Intelligence to investigate Chinese involvement in Brazilian agriculture. And specifically, it's going to require a report within 90 days from the ODNI on the extent of Chinese underwriting or investment in control of Brazilian agriculture, China's strategy in the Western Hemisphere, and its interaction with Brazil, and its impact on global food supplies. I think the bottom line up front here is that this ties into this new national security strategy because the U.S. is a major U.S. exporter of agriculture. And going back to the Zehan video that Mike and I talked about, his argument, from my perspective, is that basically the global system is returning over the next 10 years to something closer to mercantilism. The idea is that now global competitors are going to be fighting over consumer markets. And as part, I think that if Trump is trying to front load that process and put the U.S. in a advantageous position, then the focus going forward is going to be the U.S. wanting to be an exporter for non-hemispheric consumer markets of goods, including agriculture. I think this is also part of this larger Neo-Monroe Doctrine, or as I've seen it called, Donroe Doctrine, of pushing Chinese and Russian influence out of the Western Hemisphere. I think 2 weeks ago, we covered these food supply chain task forces. I think that's also ties into this on the domestic side, where the Trump administration is trying to also assess the Chinese and foreign control of U.S. food production domestically, which ostensibly it's about price fixing, but I think it's really about discerning and then pushing out that foreign control of U.S. food production. Jared, if you could come on, you had an alternative idea about this, but I think this is focused on the access in the future for U.S. agriculture to consumer markets. And there have been some other things that I've seen happening in Brazil, where the United States is trying to get control over some, especially rare earth mineral mining. There was a Netherlands official, I think a few weeks ago, who reported to their media that during the government shutdown, the U.S. actually bought up rare earth mineral production from a Brazilian mine through 2030. That was kind of a coup, or a stepping in front of the Netherlands government and some other European governments to actually get a corner on that rare earth mineral mining.
Yeah. I think that, yes, we have to worry about the food chain supply risks here, which came out on the 6th of December. But that would also potentially run afoul of that order if we are importing Brazilian products like bananas. Additionally, this being that it is Brazilian agriculture, that is to use the words, strategically vital asset for Brazil and the United States. In the Western Hemisphere section of the National Security Strategy consistently says, yes, we have to drive out all foreign influence, but we also have to work with nations in our hemisphere if they're able to come to the table at all. And appeal to their interests. We have to work with them in shared interests. It is in the U.S. interest to get China out of Brazilian agriculture, and it is in Brazilian interest to have control of their own agriculture. So I think this is also going to play directly into the recently released national security strategy.
All right. Thank you for that, Jared. Let's going to move on to our last item for today. So, according to some lobbying disclosures and some congressional staff who spoke anonymously that are familiar with what's going on, Abbott Laboratories apparently threatened to stop production of its line of premature term baby formula if Congress does not shield the company from wrongful death lawsuits that have been going on for years. And I think here we've covered Abbott Laboratories before. They're about 50% of the market share for baby formula in the United States, and they've been at the center of some of these shortages starting in 2022 and some sanitation issues. And now it appears that instead of fixing some of the unsanitary conditions that have led to these wrongful death lawsuits, there are things like chronobacter cross-contamination and some other bacterial contaminations that have led to alleged wrongful deaths of infants. They are now lobbying Congress to make these lawsuits go away in future and shield them from future liability. I think this is part of a longer term issue that we talked about back then, is that the FDA and USDA have had long-term issues with inspections. And I think this was from 2023. There was a Government Accountability Office report that said they were only conducting something like a single-digit percentage of required food inspections every year. And that's here in the United States, not even overseas, where they have definitely had issues with food safety inspections. And I think this is something I have not seen anything from the Trump administration talking about fixing this or pushing the FDA and USDA to actually ramp up the required food inspection process that they're supposed to conduct. So I think this is a long-term issue we're probably going to have to deal with, just like with the energy crisis and water security issues. I think now something that we're going to have to be aware of is that there are going to probably be some issue with unsanitary food production in the United States. This is not just in baby formula. This is just one of the more prominent examples. There have also been some issues with meat processing as well, and so even food imports. I think a couple of years ago we covered applesauce that was being imported from Ecuador that had lead contamination. So from what I can find, this is the Trump administration has yet to identify this publicly, and I'm still keeping an eye out on if they are going to do this. But there are, I think, unfortunately, one thing we're going to have to consider moving forward, especially as Mike has talked about, where there's the potential we're headed toward a domestic unrest situation, that some of these problems are going to fall by the wayside, and you're going to have to be much more diligent yourself about keeping up to date on the sources of the food you're buying, because in this case, well, if you're buying this formula, there's a unfortunately high chance that you're risking some kind of bacterial infection. And this is going to, and I think this is going to be an ongoing issue that the United States is going to have to deal with, especially during a time of political upheaval where the U.S. government's focus is probably not going to be on some of these issues, but much more on domestic unrest. All right, well, let's move over to questions and answers, Jared. First from Bad Wabbit, is there any support in Congress on getting the in-person ID required voting bill? I have not seen anything specific. I don't think there is a lot of that. Definitely not from the Democratic Party, but there are some parts of the Republican Party who've pushed back on the idea of getting rid of mail-in voting and mail-in ballots. The argument for that from those parts of the Republican Party and political apparatus is that the Republicans are reliant on older voters who post-COVID tend to favor mail-in ballots. So I have not seen any support for that. Next question, please, Jared. also from Bad Web, by helping illegal aliens, they are in fact perpetrating a crime, perpetuating, aiding and abetting. Why are these people not being arrested? Well, I think part of it is the capacity issue. So as we talked about before, ICE is trying to ramp up their capacity. They're trying to add 10,000 ICE agents. I think HSI, or Homeland Security Investigations, is also trying to ramp up as part of that. But I think a big part of why you don't see this huge amount of arrests for things that might be crimes, and for in a lot of the cases being dropped when they do arrest people who for assaulting federal agents, like in Chicago, that they get dropped, is just a capacity issue. There's only so much focus that can be given, attention that can be given out, and I think part of this is a decision to focus all your resources on enforcement operations. Next question, please, Jared. From Bad Wabbit, how long or how far can the U.S. go on the Venezuela front before China, Russia, Cuba get physically involved? I think this is a Jared question.
Yeah, I just don't think that's going to happen. China and Russia, all the tyranny distance issues that are touted about the U.S. Navy over in the Pacific, it's far worse for China and Russia trying to get to Venezuela. On top of that, Venezuela is not frankly, it's just not that important for them. Cuba, I also doubt could even do that because they're constantly suffering nationwide power outages right now. I don't know if they have the ability to project much past their own coastline.
All right. And then I saw from Bad Wabbit a comment. You think Homeland would be involved in that, these NGOs giving aid to criminals? Now, there has been some stuff coming out of the Trump administration that they are getting the IRS involved, for example, with these nonprofits. But a lot of these investigations do take time, especially when you're talking investigation that could end in a federal prosecution. You might be talking about a year or 2 years, prolonged process. From what I can find, the Trump administration is at least saying that they are looking into this nonprofit complex that we've covered previously. That is, even the IRS has said that it's in congressional hearings that it's pretty opaque, because the way that these are structured, it's difficult, at least on the surface level, to tell how this money is coming into this nonprofit network, and then how the money is inevitably ends up in the hands of activist groups or political campaigns or political action committees that are not supposed to coordinate with political campaigns, but are supporting political campaigns through some of this what's called dark money. All right, we'll give you guys a couple more seconds to get some additional questions in.
I do want to clarify one thing. Bad Wabbit mentioned that, hey, yeah, Venezuela's oil is important. It is important for China, but China also has options with Russia and Iran that are not currently under this severe of a threat. So just making sure that we understand Venezuela is important, but it's not underpinning. It's important, but it's not going to drag China into a war in the Caribbean.
Yeah, I think that's also a force projection thing, right? Like,
oh yeah, they cannot.
Yeah, there's this talk about logistics hurdles for the U.S. in the South China Sea, right? That China would have the same, or even worse, I think, problems trying to project force into the Caribbean.
I would say that it would be far worse for China to try to project power into the Caribbean than it would for the U.S. to project power into the Asian Pacific, because the U.S. can rely on a network of allies and decades-old, very extremely mature logistics chains all the way over to there. China doesn't have anything remotely like that. Not to mention the issues with their blue water navy actually getting over here in the first place.
Well, wouldn't that be why there was a lot of Chinese focus on effective control over the Panama Canal, right? Like these strategic choke points for the region, rather than trying to have a military force projection in the region, our region.
Yeah.
All right. And then from Bad Wabbit, did I miss you guys moving over to the high side today? So per Mike yesterday, from now on, we are going to have the entire show on we're going to have the entire show public facing now, for now, while we work on the update for our website, which I think Mike said yesterday is coming at the end of the month. And then from Bad Wabbit, also I see Robert in their control reports. Yeah, that's another thing, Jared. If you want to talk about that, is that I think it was last year we published that map of Chinese ports globally, and there were quite a few outside of the South China Sea that they have influence or some type of influence over. Whether it's there are ostensibly Chinese private companies that have port contracts where they actually run these ports, or some other type of investment.
Yeah, it'll be the third time we mention it, but competitor control over strategically vital assets. That's I expect the Trump administration to get on that if they are not already trying to do that wholesale through there. Peru recently they ousted their president via veto and installed a new one who appears to at least be more aligned with the United States. Peru holds that Chancay megaport that cut down significantly on China's logistics from South America to China and vice versa. We could see pressure be put there to actually start removing Chinese influence on that megaport.
Well, so this is actually the idea that China has started to have influence over these ports. This is something that I would think the U.S. foreign policy would have been focused on. This goes back almost 100 years, or more than 100 years, to an admiral in the United States, Mahon, who published a paper. It's a foundational paper for international relations theory that every international relations student reads. Is his book on basically a U.S. grand strategy that includes control of ports globally. Yeah. And the idea that it's kind of baffling to me that over the last 40 years, U.S. foreign policy has allowed this situation to develop where China has control over these global ports in a way that is implementing that grand strategy or part of that grand strategic approach that the United States should be doing.
Yeah, against the premier naval power who theoretically would need all of those ports. Yeah, baffling.
All right. Well, if that's the end of our questions for today, we will be back in your inbox on Monday and on the show at 08 Central. Be safe and stay out front.